everyone and welcome back to my channel. It is that time of the year in which I get to talk about some of my favorite books that I have read in that year. Basically, I have scanned my shelves and looked through all of the 122 books that I have read in 2017, and I've decided on the very best of the books, la crème de la crème as they say in French, and found the 9 books that I believe are the best I have read this year. I also have 2 books that are honorable mentions. I'm not counting rereads because a lot of the rereads I did this year were favorites of mine as well. I am very excited and I'm pretty sure that you've been looking forward to this one as well. Let me start with the honorable mentions. First of all, we have this beauty, which I read in the beginning of the year, Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo. It takes place in Nigeria. It's about a woman who desperately wants a child, but she can't seem to get pregnant, and she feels like she keeps disappointing her husband and her family and also herself. And then the story takes off from there, so that this one comes with so many twists and turns that I didn't see coming, and I loved it exactly for that. And the last honorable mention I have is this one, This Must Be the Place by Maggie O'Farrell. I loved this book a lot when I read it. I will have to say though that now, thinking back on it, I don't quite remember what made me love it so much. So I don't think it's one of those books that will stick with me for years and years, but I did love it a lot when I did read it. This one takes place in different places in the world, mainly in Great Britain and in America as far as I remember, and it's told from different points of view. It's a story about love and marriage and hope and guilt, and it's one of those narratives that I just really like because it's quite a junky book and it's got a lot of themes to it. It's about family and real life, and I just really love this one, but not quite as much as the other books I'm going to get to right now. And that's my mother writing. Thank you. I have now made it to the 9 books, I think there are 9 of them, which I consider my absolute favorites of this year. Let's start big and start out with the book that I consider to be the best read of 2017, and that is The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. I love John Steinbeck to pieces, and this is one of my favorites of his, if not my favorite. It takes place in America, and it's about this Great Depression that forces people to move from east to west, and then we follow this Oklahoma family who is forced to leave their home and everything in order to find their fortune in the west, where they are promised that there will be lots of work and lots of opportunities for them. It's a very raw story, and that's why I liked it, especially the ending really made an impact on me. So this is one that I do consider my favorite book of 2017. Not to say that the other books aren't good as well, because they definitely are, so please don't stop watching. Next novel is one that made me want to go ballet dancing, and that is The Crane's Dance by Meg Howry. Meg Howry was a ballet dancer herself in her youth, and she has now written a fictional tale in which she talks about 2 sisters who are both ballet dancers, but one of them has gone down from depression and mental illness, so that we now follow the other sister who is still a ballet dancer in New York, and also her guilt as to her sister and how much they could have done for her. And also we realize that this branch of work is hard, and I did know that already, but we realize that the main character of the story also slowly starts to break down from this dancing. This is one of the shorter works, so if you're up for a really good story that won't take you days and days and days to read, then I would recommend this one. The next one is also a shorter piece of work, but this one is non-fiction, and that is The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. Of course, I had to include this one on the list because it made an impact on me, and I think it's one of those books that you just have to read at some point in your life. This one is about Joan Didion, who on the same day basically lost her daughter and her husband, and it's about grief and how she dealt with that grief of having lost her closest family in a couple of days. But I think it's very important and educating to read about her experiences and her personal development, her grief, her breaking out from everything and trying to cope with things. This was such an impactful read, and one that you definitely must check out and also read if you want to. Let's continue with the non-fictional pieces of work. The next one is the one that definitely made an impact on me, and I think it's because I also watched the movie right after, so this story is very vivid in my head right now, but that is The Glass Castle by Janet Walls. It starts out with Janet living in New York, being one of the social elites, and then discovering her mother out of the cab window when she's driving through New York. The thing is that her mother is homeless and she is rummaging in some garbage on the street. And Jeanette feels very embarrassed by this because she hasn't told any of her friends that her parents are actually homeless while she is living the big life in New York. Now, to be fair, Jeanette has offered a lot of times to provide her parents with a home and with some money, but they have refused that. So basically they have decided on this life themselves. But this book is actually not about that. It's about her childhood and how Jeanette grew up with these parents who were very adventurous, maybe a little bit too adventurous. They didn't really provide a home for their children, and they kept moving around, they kept being short on money, and they weren't able to provide their children with a safe home and a safe childhood. This one comes with a lot of disturbing scenes in it, but I think it's great and I think it's very provocative in a good way. I liked it a lot. I read a book by one of my favorite authors, and it is part of my favorites list now because this author is just really good, and that is John Irving. I have here The World According to Garp. I loved it. It's a very peculiar story, I agree, but that's what made me love it. It's about Garp and his mother and how they grow up together and how Garp becomes his own person and starts college and everything that just happens to him. I really liked it. It sounds so simple, but it is quite a chunky book, and it's one that you can dive into and really get to know Garp and his mother, and you just fall in love with them. The next book has to be the chunkiest of the bunch, and that is Blonde by Joyce Carol Oates. I remember reading this in the spring very fondly. I loved it. I flew through this novel in a matter of a week, I think. This is based on Marilyn Monroe's life, her childhood and her adulthood. It's a fictional piece of work, but it is based on her life. I have mentioned this quite a few times in my videos, so that it's kind of funny to see how much of it is based on facts, but also be able to distinguish between fact and fiction. As I said, flew through it, and I was so educated on Marilyn Monroe's life on a very personal level because it is told from her point of view. I think it is. Maybe it's not, but it feels like it is. That's what I'm trying to say. So this was one that reached out to me. It touched me, it moved me, and by the time I finished it, I felt like I had concluded something that was really worth my time. I am down to the last 3 novels, and the next one is another one from one of my favorite authors, and that is Haruki Murakami's The Colorless Tsukubu Sakaki's Years of Pilgrimage. Don't quote me on that. So this one is about 4 college students and another one. Actually, there are 5 of them. As the story progresses, the main character that we follow is being outcast from this group of friends, and he has no idea what has happened, but his friends all of a sudden stop calling him, they stop talking to him, they won't communicate at all. So he is left alone, and then about 10 years later, he decides to reach out to them and figure out what really went on. I loved it. It kind of reminded me a tiny little bit of The Secret History by Donna Tartt, which is another one of my favorite books. But let's not talk about that right now. This one is great because Haruki Murakami writes amazing stories set in Japan. They give you an insight into Japanese life and culture. They are so simple, but yet so impactful, and this one is another one of those. Next novel is My Absolute Darling by Gabrielle Talent. Wow, this one was hard to read because it deals with a daughter who lives alone with her father, and he has a very brutal way of raising her. So it's one of those books that will kind of break your heart, but it's also very educating on how some people live. I mean, this is fiction, but some people live a very harsh childhood, and my heart goes out to this main character who has to deal with so much while still being absolutely in love with her father. She knows that she has to escape him at some point, but you know how it is, it's so hard to do that. So this one I really loved. It's one of those books that I've thought a lot about afterwards, and I remember it quite vividly. And that leads me to the very last book on my list of favorite books I read in 2017, and that is The Unseen World by Liz Moore. And I'm sure you've heard of this one. It's quite a popular book here on BookTube, and that's why I picked it up. And fortunately, I agree with everyone that this one is really, really amazing. It's about a 13-year-old girl called Ada. Isn't that what she's called? You know what it is with me and names. Yes, that's what she's called. She lives with her father, and they have this connection that is just amazing. Actually, their connection is the complete opposite of this one. This father is loving, he is caring, and he makes sure to educate his daughter on numbers and things that fascinates her. And basically, they just have a really great relationship. So it's very heartbreaking for Ada when she one day realizes that something is wrong with her father. He starts forgetting things that he wouldn't normally forget. He starts being way more messy and way more unclear on things. So our poor 13-year-old Ada has to deal with this herself. At least that's what she feels like, and then it's about her endeavor to do that. This one was really quite something. I adored it, and I really recommend that you read it if you haven't already. It's one of those books that will blow you away and really make an impact because it's unique and it's true, and it's just such a beautiful story. I am out of breath now. I get so excited whenever I talk about some of my favorite books, but I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you got something out of it. Have a great day, everyone, and happy reading.